Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up, Cook Islands Prime Minister due to finalise a deal with China. Diplomatic rows have emerged in recent weeks between New Zealand and its Pacific neighbours. New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Office said Winston Peters has made repeated attempts for the government of the Cook Islands to share details of the proposed agreement with China, which they have not done. In addition, New Zealand has put Kiribasa's aid under review as a result of a cancelled meeting, and a Samoan village has sought help from China following the sinking of the HMS Manawanui. I spoke to geopolitics expert Geoffrey Miller and began to ask for his take on the spat between New Zealand and the Cook Islands.
Well, I think it's all rather unedifying. It's quite unseemly the way that this has all come out into the public view. As much as I find it interesting as an observer to see all the sausages and how they're being made, but it's not usual that you get some of the statements that have come out of Winston Peters' office in the past few days. One saying that Cook Islands and New Zealand are not seeing eye to eye, listing the grievances. Saying that the Cook Islands have improperly consulted with New Zealand. It's very rare in diplomacy that you get these kinds of statements, particularly between countries that really are meant to be the closest of friends, and that's very much the case for the Cook Islands and New Zealand. Remember, their people both share the same New Zealand passport, so it has been quite a surprise, quite puzzling to me the way that this has broken out into the open.
You brought up consulting, so I'm just wondering, why does the Cook Islands had to consult with New Zealand on foreign matters when the 2001 declaration also states that they're a sovereign and independent state?
Exactly. The 2001 declaration is very contradictory, and I encourage listeners to go and look at that declaration. It's quite a straightforward document. It's not difficult to read. But if you go and look at it in clause 4, it does say straight off that the Cook Islands interacts with the international community as a sovereign and independent state. Now, that's clause 4 on foreign affairs. Later on, it does say that the signatories undertake to consult regularly on foreign affairs matters with a view to formulating common policies on important foreign affairs issues. But that's pretty much as specific as it gets. There is even another clause, clause 5 on treaties, which says expressly that the government of the Cook Islands possesses the capacity to enter into treaties and other international agreements in its own right with governments. And that's exactly what Mark Brown is doing here with the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership with China. So in the end, you can perhaps put some of the blame at successive New Zealand governments. I don't know why you would sign up to a document like that that has just got such contradictory elements. I guess at the time in 2001, it was a very different time. It was a very different era. China was interested in the Pacific at that time, but it was a very new interest and it was at a very low level compared with today. And perhaps New Zealand at the time thought, well, the Cook Islands don't really have any options. This is simply a document we're doing. It looks good. We want them to be more independent because we want them to take more responsibility for themselves. So we'll put that in their sovereign and independent state. But I think New Zealand is finding out now that words do have meaning, and Mark Brown can rightly point to that document and say, well, what are you complaining about here? I'm acting we're acting as a sovereign and independent state here.
Would you say then that it's time to review the 2001 declaration?
There may be an argument for that, but I think then New Zealand would have to tread very carefully. I think New Zealand has a lot to think about at this point because there's a real risk in coming in and being quite heavy-handed with the Cook Islands on this issue and saying what you can't do and what you can do. And it comes across as quite paternalistic. It comes across as quite colonial. And I don't think it's helpful. And it's quite contradictory to the way that New Zealand actually has acted over the past year. If you remember in 2024, Winston Peters, the foreign minister, made quite a play of visiting every member or almost every member of the Pacific Islands Forum, and he emphasized at every stop the Pacific family. New Zealand is a good neighbor. He gave out small amounts of aid pretty much on every stop for development projects, cooperation, climate change projects, resilience plans of all kinds. a new weather radar for Tonga, for example. I mean, there were all kinds of projects last year that were announced, and it was very much a good cop strategy. And I thought it was very effective. But this year has been quite a turnaround with what we've seen with both Kiribati and now the Cook Islands. It's almost like there's been a change in strategy here, and Winston Peters has got the big stick out. And I don't know why you would suddenly change tack like that. I don't think it's going to win New Zealand a lot of friends.
Do you think the public are overreacting to the deal that Mark Brown will sign with Beijing? There hasn't been much details as to what would be in this agreement, so why the concern?
Well, I think we do need to wait and see what this agreement has in it. I think perhaps where the public interest has come is just these quite extraordinary statements coming out of Winston Peters' office. I mean, they do make you sit up and read them. Normally, diplomatic statements, look, they're quite dull, and they're very much orchestrated. They're pre-written. These statements are not like that. These statements are very strong, and I think that's perhaps what the public are reacting to. These statements saying the Cook Islands and New Zealand are not seeing eye to eye on these issues, saying that the Cook Islands have improperly consulted, openly expressing a great amount of displeasure. This is not something that you would normally expect between New Zealand and any of the Pacific states at the moment, really. So it's been quite surprising, and yeah, I think that's where a lot of the public interest has come from. And of course, it does fit into this bigger picture of geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific, and there's a lot of interest now in this issue. China is interested in the Pacific. Western countries are also more interested in the Pacific as a result because they see China taking a stronger interest. So it fits into this overall narrative, I guess, and this is what is driving the interest in what's happening at the moment.
Now, earlier you mentioned that Winston made the effort to visit most of the Pacific Island Forum members, but now we've seen that he's put Kiribati aid under review, and there's also been reports of a village in Samoa. They've been seeking assistance from China to help with the Manawanui cleanup. Would you say that New Zealand's relationship with the Pacific is in jeopardy, or is that still early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I think it's still early days here. I'm not sure I'd go that far to say that it's in jeopardy. New Zealand's relations with the Pacific are in jeopardy overall. But there are real questions to be asked of New Zealand's Foreign Minister. What is driving this change in strategy here? Why would you undermine all the good work, as you would see it from his perspective, that has been done over the last year, all the travel, all the goodwill that has been built up? I don't know why you would undermine that now. And certainly the reaction to what happened with Kiribati seemed so over the top. And you almost wonder, was there more to it below the surface, or was it an overreaction? It seemed to me like an overreaction. In the end, yes, the meeting had been scheduled with the president. It couldn't happen. I mean, that can happen in diplomacy. I'm sure that Winston Peters has been stood up by other foreign ministers and leaders in the past in bigger countries. Perhaps it's the fact that Kiribati is smaller, New Zealand's the bigger partner, and the Kiribati is meant to jump when Mr. Peters asks for it. I don't know, but it seemed like a pretty harsh punishment to then put the aid program under review, almost as if you're going to punish the people of Kiribati for the decisions or the scheduling issues of the president. It seemed over the top to me, and the Australian Deputy Prime Minister had gone before that visit that was scheduled for Winston Peters and had accepted a meeting with the Vice President. It had gone well by all accounts. So I don't know what really drove Mr. Peters' reaction on that, but combining that issue with those issues, the other issues that you mentioned, obviously with the Cook Islands and Samoa, yeah, it's not a good start to 2025 for New Zealand in the Pacific. If you're looking at that positive strategy, that Pacific family strategy that New Zealand had tried over the past year, that seemed to actually be working, and this seems to now be undermining that strategy.